bill, the process about the bill, one of the items. But I don't know if you have heard that it is a legislation for the future. Not just about health care for America, but about a healthier America, where preventive care is not something that you have to pay a deductible for or out of pocket. That prevention is about diet, not diabetes. But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it away from the fog.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome former Secretary of State of the United States, Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I have the great pleasure to introduce our next two speakers who are about to have a conversation concerning health care, Bill Clinton and President Barack Obama.
Thank you for coming.
Well, it is wonderful to be back, and let me start just by saying to all the people who have, for years now, supported the incredible efforts of CGI. Thank you. We're very proud of what you all do. And let me say that we still miss our former Secretary of State.
Well, that brings me to my first healthcare comment. This is going to be a conversation about domestic and international health and America's role in it.
An array of consumer protections and savings for consumers that result directly from the law that we passed. And for those who say that they want to repeal it, typically when you ask them about, well, what are all these various benefits, they say, well, that one's good, and that one's pretty good, and we'd keep that. And you pretty much go down the list, and there's not too much people object to.
Is President Obama's struggle to rescue his signature piece of legislation, the Affordable Care Act? The president has been consulting with top insurance company executives to try and smooth over his latest legislative fix.
But the program is such a mess that Mr. Obama is even having trouble winning support from some in his own party. Jeff Pegues is at the White House with more on that story. Good morning, Jeff.
Good morning, Vanita. The White House is scrambling, trying to get ahead of the almost daily negative headlines about the rollout of the Affordable Care Act. The president on Friday summoning 15 health insurance executives here to the White House, trying to explain to them why he decided to reverse course over millions of canceled insurance policies.
What we're going to be doing is brainstorming on how do we make sure that everybody understands what their options are.
The meeting at the White House happened a day after the president announced his plan to allow insurance companies to renew and extend for at least a year canceled policies that did not meet the minimum requirements of the Affordable Care Act. It was damage control after acknowledging that he'd made a promise he couldn't keep.
We fumbled the rollout on this healthcare law.
But the change has angered insurance companies who will have about 30 days to contact millions of consumers whose policies have been canceled, give them new options, and recalculate all their insurance premiums.
The bill is passed.
And in the House of Representatives, Democrats are defecting. Nearly 1/5 joined with Republicans to vote in favor of a GOP-sponsored bill which extends those canceled insurance plans and goes a step further by allowing new people to sign up for them. Republican Congressman Fred Upton.
For millions of Americans, it's cancellation today, sticker shock tomorrow.
Was my failure to fully appreciate at the time just how susceptible we had become to lies and conspiracy theories, despite having spent years being a target of disinformation myself.
If you have insurance that you like, then you will be able to keep that insurance. If you've got a doctor that you like, you will be able to keep your doctor. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. If you like your health care plan, you can keep your health care plan.
For his repeated promise that everyone can keep their health care plans if they choose to under Obamacare. It's a rather stunning reversal because, as now you, us, everybody has heard him give assurance after assurance for years that if you like your plan, you're going to get to keep it. We, of course, know that to be false. Some people will lose their insurance plans even if they like them. And just moments ago, the president spoke to Chuck Todd of MSNBC and responded to the anger that some Americans feel about that promise right now.
I regret very much that what we intended to do, which is to make sure that everybody is moving into better plans because they want them as opposed to because they're forced into it, that we weren't as clear as we needed to be in terms of the changes that were taking place. Because of this law, because of Obamacare, another 20 million Americans now know the financial security of health insurance. And I want to do everything we can to make sure that people are finding themselves in a good position, a better position than they were before this law happened. And I am sorry that they are finding themselves in this situation based on assurances they got from me. We've got to work hard to make sure that they know we hear them and that we're going to do everything we can to deal with folks who find themselves in a tough position as a consequence of this.
All right, John King, John Avlon, and Gloria Borgia are here. John Avlon, you're sitting next to me, so let me start with you. You heard the words there, I am sorry. But you also heard a whole lot of things before it. I regret we might have misled. We weren't as clear as we needed to be. He didn't run into the I'm sorry part.
No. I mean, this president has been very reluctant to really take the reins of accountability when it comes to this colossal screw up with healthcare.gov, and now the questions about whether he wasn't telling the truth to the American people on all those sound bites, all those campaign stumps. There's an old saying in politics, when you're eating humble pie, you don't nibble in it. This president has a real problem eating humble pie. You got to scarf it down. And this is an attempt to try to own it and to say we're going to make it better. But you see the fundamental discomfort the president has with really saying, I'm sorry, I screwed up. I was wrong when I said those things on the stump.
I mean, you really do, John King. You hear that. He just doesn't want to do that. And even when he said he's sorry, it's within the context of, but hold on, guys, your plan is still going to be better. The vast majority of people, he wants to keep making that point.
Was it Ronald Reagan who said facts are stubborn things? I think the timeline here, Aaron, is very, very important. The administration, the Department of Health and Human Services, his administration knew in the summer of 2010 that as many of 2/3 of the people in that individual marketplace, people who buy insurance, would be impacted, that their plans might change. As many as 2/3 of them in July of 2010, and the president went through an entire re-election campaign 2 years later. 2 years later, telling the American people, you won't have to change your plan if you like it, period.
And what we now have set up are these marketplaces that provide high-quality health care at affordable prices, giving people choices so that they can get the health insurance that they need and they want, and the premiums are significantly lower than what they were able to previously get.
Why more than half of the insurance co-ops set up under Obamacare have failed. One co-op in Vermont that received a $30 million taxpayer loan failed before it enrolled a single person. In all, the government handed out $2.4 billion in loans. Co-ops were designed to foster insurance competition, which is something even opponents of Obamacare applauded. But from the start, there were warning signs that the program is financially risky.
As early as 2011, HHS predicted that 36% of the loans would go unpaid. In 2012, the Office of Management and Budget projected taxpayers would lose 43% of loans offered through the program. The following year, a HHS OIG report expressed concern about co-ops' financial stability and ability to repay loans.
Officials don't expect taxpayers will ever recover the millions lost so far.
Our look at the Affordable Care Act and health insurance coverage as year 3 gets underway. This weekend marks the beginning of open enrollment in the healthcare exchanges, and we're looking at some of the questions about costs and coverage. One development this fall that is turning into a concern for some consumers, a series of collapses of an alternative to traditional insurance plans known as co-ops. Nearly a half of them, which were created through the Affordable Care Act, are now shutting down.
Obamacare is collapsing all around us. Insurers are backing out. People can't afford the premiums. And even heavily subsidized co-ops are crashing. More than $2 billion, that was $2 billion, were funneled into 23 co-ops across the country. 16 have gone under or are about to go under. The other 7, they're just treading water. Now, what does that mean? That means people who had insurance, who purchased it just as Obamacare forced them to do, were left in the lurch. When the co-op they got and the insurance was failed. Now that's bad enough. This is just another way the promise that all of us were told, if you like your plan, you could keep it, was broken.
I sat down to discuss this all yesterday with Mary Agnes Carey of Kaiser Health News. And Mary Agnes Carey is with us again, so welcome back. Now, let's focus on this thing called co-ops. Remind us exactly what they are and what did the administration want them to accomplish?
As they were negotiating the Affordable Care Act, Democrats wanted a public option. They wanted a uniform option available to everyone across the country for health insurance. That wasn't going to happen, but as an alternative, they created these independent, nonprofit co-ops that were to be an alternative to the traditional insurer, and it was to be an option for consumers.
And they believed this was going to cover a chunk of the uninsured out there.
They absolutely did, but they ran into a few roadblocks. For example, in a budget deal a few years ago, the funding for co-ops was cut. There recently was an announcement from the Department of Health and Human Services. They could not give these insurance companies and others as much as anticipated to help offset some of the higher cost cases. And that's where some of the co-ops got into trouble. Some of them were very popular. They were low cost alternatives. That meant sometimes sicker beneficiaries came to them. And that's where some of the financial problems happened.
Well, let's look, Mary Agnes, at a gentleman. His name is Edward Azria. He lives in New York. He was in a co-op in Brooklyn, but then it collapsed. Let's hear from him.
The premium and the deductibles were good, certainly for my needs, because I'm not habitually in the doctor's office for anything. And so it was easy to maintain coming out and starting out on my own to take that monthly payment where it was without having it be too heavy of a burden going forward, and they provided everything that I needed. My biggest worry is that to stay within the same price point, if it's even going to be possible, is the level of services going to be diminished because they have to make up for it. The price point of the co-op was obviously too good to be true. So it's going to be interesting to see what they actually do come up with and if they're going to cut the services to make up for it.
So these people are left without insurance through no fault of their own. Insurance they were forced to buy. And what is the response? What does Obamacare say? Tax them. Tax them for not having insurance. Now, I don't know about you, Mr. Speaker, but isn't that a little crazy? How can you punish people for not having insurance when the co-op they bought their insurance from goes under?
So, Mary Agnes, what does the administration do for someone like Mr. Azria?
HH Secretary Sylvia Burwell had a briefing with reporters. She was asked a few questions about the co-ops. She said they're going to have special outreach to these folks. We're talking about 500,000 people or more in the 10 co-ops that have folded that are going to be out there looking for plans, reaching out to them, explaining to them how to look, how to navigate for their plans. And also, they're trying to investigate what they might be able to do, they being the Department of Health and Human Services, either administratively or through the legislative process to try to grant some reliefs to some of these co-ops, because of course there are some that are still struggling financially.
And do they think they're going to be able to find an option for someone like him at the same price point?
I think they could. You have to remember that in the Affordable Care Act, there are different tiers of coverage: bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. If he's interested in a lower monthly premium, a bronze plan might work for him. It may not be the exact same plan he had in his co-op, which he obviously really liked.
One goal of Obamacare is to make insurance easier to shop. How? By standardizing policies and then giving them simple labels like bronze, silver, gold, platinum. The lowest cost plans coincide with the least precious metal. Bronze is cheapest, then silver. But these plans also don't provide as much coverage. Bronze plans will cover an average of 60% of overall health care cost, and silver, 70%. Like gold jewelry, gold plans are more expensive than bronze or silver, but they also cover more, 80% of expenses. And the king of metals, platinum, has the highest monthly premiums and covers 90% of your overall cost of health care.
But again, that's where whether you go on to healthcare.gov yourself or you get assistance from a broker or an insurance agent or work with many of the community groups that are kind of on the ground trying to help people find coverage, he's going to have to get in there and look, what's covered? Are my doctors covered? Are my prescription drugs covered? How much is this plan cost in the premium and the out-of-pocket costs? What's the total package and how does it compare to what he had and what he can afford?
Explain again, Mary Agnes, why a number of these co-ops just didn't make it.
They had basically had solvency issues, financial solvency issues. If they were the lower price point that tended to attract sicker beneficiaries, that would drive up their costs. They had anticipated fairly large payments from the federal government to help offset the cost of those sicker folks. But of course, as we mentioned earlier, there was a change in their funding was cut early on in the inception of the co-ops. And then secondly, there was another legislative change that adjusted the amount of money that the federal government could pay them. It's a program that says if you have a lot of healthier beneficiaries, you pay in, and that is the insurers pay in, and that money is distributed to the insurance plans that take care of the sicker folks. The insurers, including many of these co-ops, expected a much more generous payment from the administration than they're receiving, and that has hurt their bottom line.
This is going to be a tax on individuals now and businesses.
Yeah, look, this is a penalty on free riders when you talk about the mandate, very simply. You know, you heard Speaker Boehner, Mitt Romney, 95% of Americans will be affected. 1% will be under this penalty because most other Americans obviously have
1% of
healthcare.
individuals, but what about 1% of small businesses?
Well, as you said, small businesses under 50 don't have to provide health care. Those with under 25 employers get a subsidy to do it. And those who are larger than that are going to find their costs going down and their bureaucracy going down once these exchanges take effect. And so it'll be a good thing for everybody. Bottom line, healthcare was a mess. Costs were going up. Fewer people were covered. Employers were kicking people millions off the rolls. This is going to make it a whole lot better. It started to already, and it's going to get a lot better in 2014 when the exchanges, a basically free market Republican idea.
Democratic senator now says it was a mistake for Democrats to pass Obamacare when they did. New York Senator Charles Schumer says the public wanted action on the economy in 2010 during the recession. Instead, after passing the economic stimulus package, Democrats focused on pushing Obamacare through Congress, and Schumer says that was the wrong thing for his party to do.
But it wasn't the change we were hired to make. Americans were crying out for the end to the recession, for better wages and more jobs, not changes in health care.
One last thing I want to say, because I do think sometimes people come up to me and they say, well, if this is such a good deal, how come the polls show that it's not popular? Well, one of the things you and I both know is that when you come to health care, there's no more personal and intimate decision for people. I mean, this is something that people really care about. And frankly, the devil you know is always better than the devil you don't know. And that's what Harry and Louise was all about back in the 90s, right? It was scaring people with the prospect of change. And so part of our goal here is just to make sure people have good information. And there's been billions of dollars spent making people scared and worried about this stuff. And rather than try to disabuse people of every single bit of misinformation that's been out there, what we're saying is just look for yourself. Take a look at it, and you will discover that this is a good deal for you.
Or someone you know received a subsidy to help pay for health care coverage. Watch out.
Yeah, you may be asked to pay some of or all of that subsidy back.
Karen Stiles of our Call for Action office joins us now live in the newsroom with more information. Why is this occurring?
Well, Charles, if you applied for coverage through the marketplace, you were asked to provide your estimated household income for the coming year. If your income was low enough, you were offered a subsidy to offset the cost of your premiums. However, if your income ended up being higher than what you reported, you may not have been eligible to receive some or all of the subsidy. And unfortunately, when it comes time to file taxes, some people are learning that they owe this money back to the federal government. And in many cases, this can be thousands of dollars.
Wow, Karen, is there anything that people can do to kind of get some relief on the amount that they may need to pay back?
Unfortunately, the amount will need to be paid back by the tax filing deadline. If you will have trouble paying this on time, it might be a good idea to contact a qualified tax professional or the IRS to inquire about payment options as well as consequences for not paying on time.
All right, so what can people do to avoid this happening in future years?
If it appears that your income will be higher than what you reported to the marketplace, do not wait until the end of the year to face the consequences. Contact healthcare.gov early and ask for the subsidy to be adjusted. Or you can also request that the subsidy be partially or not applied at all to premiums. If your income remained low enough and you did not receive all or part of your subsidy, you will receive a higher refund when you file your federal tax return.
The president's decision to stop paying subsidies to health insurers was his second direct blow in one day at the law that has come to be known as Obamacare. The payments are made directly to insurance companies, which in turn use that money to reduce costs for lower-income Americans. The money helps pay for deductibles, for co-payments, and out-of-pocket charges. Depending on an individual's income level, the subsidies have lowered costs by, on average, $1,000 a person. But they can range anywhere from $700 to more than $3,300 a person. The subsidies were first challenged by a lawsuit from congressional Republicans in 2014. A federal judge agreed, pointing out that the money had not been formally appropriated by Congress. Still, payments have continued while this legal case was being appealed. Julie Rovner of Kaiser Health News joins me now to look at what the president's move means. Julie, welcome back to the program. So just remind us, clarify for us, who, what was getting these subsidies and why?
Well, there are two kinds of subsidies in the Affordable Care Act. People up to 4 times the poverty level get help paying their premiums. But for people who are up to 2.5 times the poverty level, it's about $30,000 for an individual, they get, in addition to the help paying the premiums, they get these helps for out-of-pocket costs on the theory that even if they could afford the premium, they might not be able to afford to go and actually get coverage. It's about 7 million people of the roughly 10 million people who buy on the health insurance exchanges, so it's a majority of those people, and actually they will continue to get these subsidies.
But you were saying to me a little while ago, it's important to point out, again, when you say 400% of the poverty level, these are people who are earning in a range of what around the country?
For a couple, it's about $64,000. Those are the people who are getting help with their premiums. To get help with these cost-sharing subsidies, you'd have to earn substantially less. For a couple, it would be about $40,000.
So let's talk about the potential impact here. What about first on the health insurance companies?
Well, this is where it's really going to come home. That right now, the insurance companies are required under their contracts and by the law to provide these subsidies to these low-income people, to provide the cost-sharing subsidies. There's this question, as we've seen with the lawsuit, about whether or not Congress formally appropriated the money, but as many lawyers have pointed out, the fact whether or not Congress appropriated it, the law says the insurance companies will provide it to the individuals, and that the federal government will pay back the insurance company. So it's money that's owed. Congress, the easy way to solve it would be for Congress to appropriate the money.
And these insurance companies, I mean, there's some dispute about what that means for these insurance companies.
That's right. Well, there's a number of things the insurance companies can do. The president telegraphed from the very beginning of his administration that he might stop paying these. For a while, it was every month. We were sort of waiting to see, would he pay them the next month? For a while, he was paying them, waiting to see if Congress was actually going to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, and they didn't. And so companies have mostly built into their premiums for next year. Remember, open enrollment starts in about 2.5 weeks. They've built in not getting these subsidies, but that's not true of every company. It's not true of every state. So it's going to be a very mixed bag. They could also sue. They could go to court and, say you owe us this money, and they might be able to get it. And others have sued on their behalf.
So that's something that's out there, and we can't predict at this moment. So consumers, bottom line, Julie, what does this mean for people who have been receiving these benefits?
Well, there's a lot of confusion about this. Not paying the subsidies, as the president pointed out, doesn't mean that the people who are getting them now won't get them. if insurance companies pull out, and they can do that, that's in most of their contracts, that if these don't get paid, they can pull out, then nobody would get coverage. But if insurers stay, then the people who are getting the subsidies will continue to get them. The people who will pay are the people who aren't getting help paying their premiums, the people who earn more than 4 times the poverty line. It's about a different 7 million people. They'll be basically asked to pay these entire premium increases because they're not getting help.
The Affordable Care Act, this law, is saving money for families and for businesses.
I think that's an outcome of this that I think a lot of people have not focused on. So let's talk about the cost to the government. I mean, on its face, you would think, oh, well, they're stopping the subsidies. That means the government's going to save a lot of money. But you were telling us it's not that simple.
No, what's ironic is that this will cost the federal government more money, according to the Congressional Budget Office, because what happens is that insurers will raise their premiums. When they raise their premiums, remember the premium subsidy comes in. Those premium subsidies will go up to match the increases in premiums. So people who are getting help won't see these increases. It's, as I just mentioned, the people who aren't getting help, the people who are paying their entire premiums themselves, they'll be asked to pay more. But the government will also be asked to pay more.
So this healthcare reform, if there were no other reason to do it except to contain the rising cost of health insurance and care in our country, that would have been the justification. This bill saves $1.3 trillion. $1.3 trillion because of the bending the curve and taking the cost down and getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse.
Julie, stepping back, look at the overall healthcare marketplace. How much is this affected to impact that?
Well, it's a relatively small piece. It's about 17 million people in the individual market out of, 330 million Americans. But even people who represent employer plans were complaining today that this could end up affecting them if there are fewer people with insurance or people who couldn't pay their out-of-pocket costs, that providers would pass those along to people with employer insurance, that there are ways that this could have a ripple effect, probably not a big one, but it could impact the rest of the health insurance market.
It's hard to think of a piece of legislation that's been more controversial than the Affordable Care Act, better known as Obamacare. But it seems like every day we learn something new about the program that's troubling, at least to some people. And today, I want to take a look at a phenomenon that's called the Obamacare subsidy cliff and how it can really affect you. My name's Dan Kaplinger. I'm the Motley Fool's Director of Investment Planning. And I found out about this taking a look at some information that looked at the limit on income that you can have in order to be eligible for subsidies under the Affordable Care Act. And basically what you point to is you take 400% of the federal poverty level. And so in dollar terms, what you're talking about is for a single person, you're talking $44,680 is that magic 400% of poverty level threshold. For every extra member of your family, you add another $15,840 to that amount. Now, why is that amount so critical? Well, as it turns out, for anyone who makes at or below that level, you're eligible for subsidies to the extent that the cost of your insurance exceeds 9.5% of your total income. But if you make even a single dollar above that limit, suddenly you're not eligible for subsidies at all. And the reason why we're calling that a cliff is that going from that 9.5% limit to effectively no subsidy at all can cost you thousands of dollars just by earning an extra $1. Even for a single person, some estimates show that the estimate from the Congressional Budget Office would cost $2,600 just for making that extra $1 of income above the threshold. Now, for family coverage, it can be even more. But one study found that for families in the older age groups, you can end up costing $10,000 or more in lost subsidies as a result of earning that extra income. And so what you really have to do is take a close look at what your income is going to be. Now, from an investing standpoint, it's really bad news for insurance companies like WellPoint that have been really counting on the Affordable Care Act, encouraging people to sign up for insurance coverage. Because if you don't know whether you're going to be eligible for a subsidy, it's really hard for you to make smart choices about which type of coverage you're going to get. You're more likely to complain to your insurance company, and that's bad news for just about everybody.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to call to attention a letter that was written by Chairman Darrell Issa, a friend from California, to Secretary Kathleen Sebelius at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services this week. First paragraph, after saying, "Dear Madam Secretary," says, "The Committee on Oversight and Government Reform is investigating the insurance exchange application online at healthcare.gov, established by the Department of Health and Human Services. As part of this investigation, we're writing to request related to voter registration data collected during the application process." On further down, the letter says, while HHS and its contractors continue to struggle with the task of processing applications for health insurance coverage, the agency uses the website to collect voter registration information. Once an applicant completes the online application for health care coverage, a dialog box appears asking, "Would you like to register to vote?" In light of the National Voter Registration Act of 1993, also known as the Motor Voter Act, which requires any agency that provides public assistance to provide individuals with an opportunity to register to vote, the department decided to include the voter registration option on the health care application. The inclusion of this voter registration may give applicants the impression that registering to vote is somehow tied to receiving health care benefits, such as insurance subsidies. Given the well-documented flaws with the health care application process, the public lacks confidence that HHS has the ability to safeguard applicants' voter information. Documents reviewed by the committee show that applicants may submit personal information over the internet during the application process without encryption, potentially exposing personally identifiable information to interception and abuse. Further down, it says, further, it's unclear how HHS uses the voting information it collects once a user submits this data on the website. Applicants expect that only state election officials will have access to their information. Voter registration contains important personal details that are valuable to various individuals and organizations. Toward the end, Chairman Issa says, these facts raise questions as to what happens when the same individual expresses the desire to register to vote multiple times. HHS does not appear to have the capacity to differentiate between duplicates and first-time applicants. In short, it's unclear what happens to voter registration information once HHS receives it. Applicants have an expectation that the federal government is not transmitting private information to third parties knowingly or unknowingly. Demos.org, they're going to register, they say, 68 million people to vote through health benefit exchanges. So, it seemed to me, was to get their annual report. So, Mr. Speaker, that's what I got. The Demos annual 2012 report. See who these people are that are going to register voters. I'm sure they would be fair and register voters from all walks of life. And then here we see the president, Miles Rappaport, and he's being the president. He's got a nice letter from the president.
Miles Rappaport, who is the executive director of an important new group called 100% Democracy. Miles and his co-author, E.J. Dionne of the Washington Post, published this really important book about a year ago called 100% Democracy, in which they make the case for what they call universal civic duty voting. A bit about Miles's background: he's a native of New York, graduated from NYU. Early in his career, moved to Connecticut, helped run a group called the Connecticut Citizen Action Group. And then he jumped into electoral politics, was elected to the Connecticut's House of Representatives, where he served for 5 terms and served a term as Connecticut's Secretary of State. in both cases working a lot on election and voting issues. He's been president of Demos, a really important liberal advocacy group, for 13 years, from 2001 to 2014, and then was president of Common Cause for several years. After that, in addition to working for 100% Democracy, he is the senior practice fellow in American democracy at the Ash Center at Harvard's Kennedy School. And Miles is joining us from his home in West Hartford, Connecticut. Term progressive activist comes up a lot, that phrase. How do you understand that? Parse that term as you think it applies to your work.
Right. Well, you made a point earlier that I want to expand on a little bit, which was that I was a part of what I would call a progressive movement in the state of Connecticut. And of course, there are analogs everywhere, including Illinois. And I think the key themes of what it means to be a progressive in my mind were, one, to fight for more equity and more equality in a society where inequality is kind of rampant. It was rampant in 1984, and it's even more rampant now. And so trying to make sure that we can close the gap between the rich and the poor, and also make sure that we are, facing the issue of the long-term effects of racism on inequality, and making sure that people of color in the country have, genuinely equality of opportunity. And then the second part of it, so those are the kind of economics of it. And then but the second part is to expand involvement and inclusiveness of our democracy. So the issues of making sure that money doesn't have an overwhelming role in our political life, expanding voting rights, making sure that people had more opportunities to register and vote.
Goes on to say, while studying at Harvard in the late 1960s, Miles Rappaport was active in the radical Students for a Democratic Society, SDS.
Take a look at the Students for a Democratic Society. Students for a Democratic Society was a radical left student organization existing from 1960 to 1969. Though it started out promoting democracy, civil rights, and opposing the Vietnam War, over the course of that decade its agenda drifted to explicit authoritarian communism and violence. Disturbingly, in the decades since, its most radical and violent leaders have been welcomed with open arms by academia and the media. In 1962, members of the Progressive Labor Movement, a Maoist organization too radical for the Communist Party USA because they believed there was no peaceful path to socialism, began joining SDS en masse after SDS removed language from their constitution that banned membership for advocates of dictatorship and totalitarianism. During a 1965 SDS annual convention, attendees voted to allow full participation by communists in the organization, which then led to the Communist Party urging their followers to join SDS as well in order to outnumber the Maoists. Naturally, when filled with communists, the organization became explicitly revolutionary in its mission. On the walls of the room at its summer 1968 National Convention at Michigan State University, SDS hung hammer and sickle banners and pictures of Soviet revolutionaries Vladimir Lenin and Leon Trotsky. That same year, SDS took over 5 campus buildings at Columbia University and held hostage the acting dean, but that wouldn't come close to the violence perpetrated by one of SDS's successor groups, the Weather Underground. In 1969, SDS fractured into multiple radical groups. The Weathermen Group was aligned around a manifesto dedicated to armed struggle and the destruction of U.S. imperialism and the achievement of a classless world communism. They were opposed to SDS's Maoists, who were forced out after being labeled counter-revolutionaries. SDS leader Bernardine Dorn, along with Bill Ayers and other members of the Weathermen Group, coalesced into a terrorist faction eventually named the Weather Underground. Vietnamese communists encouraged them to begin an armed struggle within the United States. They did exactly that, instigating the so-called Days of Rage, an October 1969 riot on the streets of Chicago that led to hundreds of arrests, injuries to police officers, and property destruction. Afterward, the group claimed credit for 24 bombings over the next 6 years at sites such as the U.S. Capitol and the Pentagon. None of this would prevent the individuals who ran the SDS or the Weathermen from reintegrating into society. Did they become less crazy? No. Instead, society, including the universities, did.
Mr. Speaker, it seems like, having in the back of my mind, SDS evolved into something called, some of them did, a Weather Underground. that Bill Ayers would know a great deal about, being that he held the first fundraiser for the man who's now our president. But the article goes on to say Harvard SDS campaigned against U.S. military involvement in Vietnam. Obviously, a lot of people did. And the presence of Reserve Officer Training Corps, ROTC, on campus. An April 7, 1969 letter to the Harvard Crimson opposing Harvard President Pussey's support for the ROTC, Miles Rappaport and fellow SDSers Naomi Shapiro, Carlin Meyer, Rick Brown wrote, quote, to conclude, President Pussey and the President Pussey, they support the U.S. military and the policies it carries out. We feel that ROTC must go because we oppose the policies of the United States and we oppose the military that perpetuates them. The lines are clearly drawn. The time to take sides is now. Well, that was Miles Rappaport, the president of Demos, that's going to register 68 million people through health benefit exchanges that most of us thought were actually just going to be trying to help people get health insurance. They're going to gather their most personal information and allegedly get them registered to vote. And you can't help but wonder what people like former SDS leader Miles Rappaport want to do with people's personal identification information. So, looking on further back in the Demos annual 2012 report, see what kind of fundraisers they've had. Well, they had a 2012 Transforming America Awards and Gala celebration. So we looked down. Who are the honorary chairs? Oh, there's Bertha Lewis, the head of, well, some may remember she was head of something called ACORN. So the former head of ACORN, right in there, honorary chairman helping Demos, that's going to register 68 million people through the health benefits exchanges. Who else we got? Oh, there's Richard Trumka, the president of the AFL-CIO. Oh, and here is our friends at Service Employees International Union, SEIU, and of course the International Union, UAW. So that gives us a little feel about what Demos is doing, but it caused a little further examination as to who is it that's gathering this very personal information that Demos wants to use to get 68 million people registered to vote through the health benefit exchanges. And there are a lot of issues that questions that need to be answered. Not only how are they using the personal information of people that just wanted to protect their families or themselves with insurance.
A pleasure now to welcome Heather McGee, the Washington Director for the Nonpartisan Public Policy Research and Advocacy Organization, Demos. And we are honored to say, Countdown contributor. Heather, good evening. Good to talk to you.
Keith, we missed you.
Thank you kindly. Give me a quick education, because I didn't do this while I was out, on how demanding various forms of ID specifically targets minority voters, poor voters, and frankly, left of center voters.
Absolutely. So nationwide, we saw in this year, honestly, a carpet bombing across the states of these kind of voter suppression bills. So voter ID, for example, it may sound common sense, right? You have to use a photo ID to do a lot of different things in this country. But exercising your constitutional right to vote should not be one of them. If you look at the numbers of who's disproportionately affected because they don't have the passport, birth certificate, social security card, why is it that we continue to allow these attacks on our democracy sort of from all over the place?
First Lady's trying to keep us all healthier, and you're trying to change the delivery and the pricing, and you have to cover everybody to do it. I think this is a big step forward for America. This will over the next decade not only make us healthier, but it will free up in the private sector largely funds that can then be reinvested in other areas of economic growth and give us a much more well-balanced economy. But first, we got to get everybody to sign up.
Everybody sign up. Go to healthcare.gov. Thank you very much.
The Democrats have gone crazy.